Hello everybody, I am the Proactive Caregiver and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver, because if you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. Today I want to expand on a previous conversation to talk about the power of caregiver expression. This is an area that I still struggle with because our expression and our communication with others, it affects how we care for our loved ones. But we have to focus on the concept of having the courage to express and how our emotions are going to affect our loved ones. I gradually became involved with Mom's daily living and recognized a cognitive issue. The cognitive problems that she was having were present, but the stories that I started to tell myself about what was happening started to sound like victim mindset. But I didn't know that then, and I certainly didn't recognize it till much later. So I've mentioned several times before how I came into this role as caregiver pretty angry and eventually more resentful. Now I understand how the victim mentality played into that. And it didn't help when my mindset was bouncing off of or playing off of Mom's victim mentality. So we had the double whammy going. I asked Dr. Amy Baker to return so we could go further into the topic of victim mindset and how that affects our nervous system. Because Dr. Baker's career began as a pharmacist and a healthcare administrator, yet turned into a leadership and intimacy coach. She stands firmly behind her claims that the prescription for health is not what we've been sold. She knew the healthcare system didn't foster health, but instead, Dr. Baker completed a functional medicine fellowship, and then a relational crisis led her to relationship coach training. This professional direction is where it became incredibly clear that humans need healthy, authentic relationships to self and others to thrive, and more importantly, keep our nervous system balanced. So thank you for joining me once again today, Dr. Baker.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So last time we had a little bit of a conversation about the similarities on how our lives connected on sexual trauma. We both kind of had our situations and how it ended up creating that hypervigilant response.
Yeah.
We also talked about how that affected our nervous system. Just to kind of give a little bit of response to all of this, that not everybody experiences sexual trauma, but especially for caregivers, as we go through our day-to-days and the stresses that we deal with, sometimes it puts us in that traumatized mindset. So what I hear most often from caregivers is, I don't have a choice, or I'm not a nurse, and therefore I'm not good enough at this. When you hear someone say that, because I definitely said it myself, what comes to mind with that victim and nervous system?
I mean, first, it hurts to hear that. I hear I'm not enough, which is an old story, probably. So there's so much in there around old stories, around feeling stuck, powerless. The first thing that comes to mind is this person is probably in survival mode,
right,
and not able to see the options, right? So if we go back to the nervous system, when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, we go into our lizard brain and our perception does this, like, oh, there's only one way. And the focus narrows, and people are not able to see all the options.
Right.
So, and they're probably going 90 miles an hour trying to take care of stuff. And so to pause feels like death. To pause and think long enough for their body to relax and their brain to see options. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing I think about is like, okay, this person is like on overdrive probably.
Oh, yeah.
Feeling like they're the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're not used to asking for help, most likely.
No, I wasn't.
So they don't have a choice because it's all up to them.
Right.
It's all on their shoulders. And that's an old story that isn't true. And I think that's one of the hardest things to get over because it's tied into usually our childhood where we were the person that took care of the emotional needs of our mom or our dad, who had to be the adult early on maybe, and took on those responsibilities and then never learned another way. That's
so interesting because as you say that, first thing that comes to mind is my mother was typically, from being manic depressive bipolar, typically depressed. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times she was not willing or able to communicate or share conversation with my dad. And many times it was my dad and I walking the track at school and having conversation. And I felt like we had a more of a mature relationship, a friendship, where he could actually talk to me and rely on me and vice versa, right? Where he couldn't talk with her. And so that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of responsibility for a young person to take on. And that usually doesn't change until we see it.
Right.
And think, okay, this is where the victim mindset comes in around. One, we need to acknowledge that in a sense, we were a victim. We shouldn't have been handed that responsibility at a young age. Right. And circumstances led to that, right?
Right.
But if we can say, wow, and acknowledge that and think, in some sense, we were a victim then of circumstances, then we can move forward from that. But I think it's actually important to acknowledge that, but then to move on.
Right.
Because in that we can grieve. We can say, okay, this is what happened. This is an old pattern. I'm still repeating it. I don't need to repeat it. And we can grieve the childhood that was lost. We can grieve, like in that responsibility.
Right.
And from that we can move forward. So that's where a lot of the anger comes from. It's like we haven't actually grieved the loss of what we didn't actually have.
That's also interesting because that makes me think of the times when I've said, this is not fair. This is not fair. I shouldn't have to do this. You should know better. Saying these things to my mom in those early years, not understanding where this is all coming from.
Yeah.
It's hard to respond in that kind of a situation. Thankfully, I was able to go to therapy and understand more of that. But I still meet so many different caregivers that no sooner that they say that, I realize, oh, they must be stuck. Mm-hmm. They must not have any help. And that's where it's coming from. But a lot of us don't have enough help when it comes to caregiving. But it goes further. And not only going further, it turns into the denial part. And that was another area that I realized that denial being a stage of grieving, I guess in a way I was grieving the loss, but because I was in denial of what was actually happening.
Yeah.
Because I always assumed that this would happen, is similar to the way things did happen with my mother, but it was going to be much later in life. Like I was going to be in my mid to late 60s, which we see a lot more of the baby boomers taking care of their parents who are in their 80s and 90s. So I just assumed that's how it was going to be. And so that denial kept me from actually recognizing it any sooner than what I did.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the idea that I was in this victim mentality it took me several years to understand and realize that's what the thought process that I was functioning in over and over. And so it took so much longer before I could reach that, okay, there is a way to caregive. I can either be this mean person or, which is, I'm sure, the way it came across to my mother, or I can become more of a compassionate person. But I couldn't get to the compassion part with all the anger. This victim mentality being tied to trauma and distress or pain. How is it that, how can caregivers actually begin to start looking at the other side of the situation, like to even try to see there is a choice?
Yeah. I think the first step is, because usually victim mentality is not like, they're not aware that they're playing the victim.
Oh, right.
Okay. So one is to acknowledge the feeling of being a victim and say, because then we see that we had a fantasy about how things should have been.
Right.
Oh, I had this fantasy. I am a victim, meaning like this hit me out of the blue. Any part of it that's really crappy, acknowledge it. Because what happens is we often override our own feelings around it, but then those feelings are still there. You know, it's like if and then because they do that to themselves, they don't even acknowledge the feelings that are underneath everything and driving everything. So like if I came to you and said, this is so hard and I feel like I'm really struggling, and you just totally blew it off, like I would feel totally unheard. And we're doing that to ourselves. And so I know it sounds counterproductive, but the first thing is to say, okay, yes, in some form or fashion, this came out of the blue. This is not how I planned it. Now what?
Right. Okay.
Now what? Because that allows some grieving for the fantasy that I thought I was going to have. We have to be able to grieve the loss of the fantasy. And then look at the benefits of the situation. I know it's like super hard. If we're only looking at the negative and we're not looking at the positive. We went in the last time we met, we talked about the polarized mind.
Right.
And so every circumstance has equal benefits and downfalls, positive and negative. Like people will probably try and debate this, but there is no right or wrong. There is no only good or bad. And so when we're able to sit and maybe even just write down, okay, what are the benefits of this happening? I get to know my mom better, or I get to be a really important person in someone's life, and just all these things, and really work to start to see the benefit and secondary benefits, like, oh, okay, I'm actually closer to my kid now because they're coming in and helping, or that allows our brain to, for us to settle down and look at reality, to not focus on just the problem and to see the benefits. That's huge.
Definitely.
Huge. And it'll often crack open someone's heart to see how it's actually serving them.
It cracked mine open. It sure did. Yeah. I think that's where the transformation actually started, because I was feeling my way through caregiving instead of thinking my way through and analyzing and planning and doing. It was when I actually started feeling it. And I like the way you say that, finding the benefits of it, because at first I was continually saying, this isn't fair, I have to do this. And then it was, this is a blessing, because by stepping away from my corporate routine, I kind of saved myself in health and self-care.
Right.
But I also got time with my mother that I wouldn't have had. May not have been the quality time that I was wanting, but majority of it had the potential for it, and it was, but it gave me time, and that, reflecting on it now was absolutely a gift. But in the moment, I was so steeped in the victim mindset that
Totally.
I couldn't see the benefits.
Totally. And now it gave you purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here we
Oh,
are.
absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's like, if we can make sense of the things in that way,
Right.
looking back and understand and trust that every hard thing in our life has served us,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to trust that this hard thing is serving me. Maybe I don't fully know yet how,
Right.
but it's on the way, not in the way in my life.
Yes.
And so the more we do review on different things in our life, the more we start to trust the process as well. So
Exactly.
sometimes work on other parts of our past facilitate not being in the victim seat now.
Right. And that's what I had to do.
Yeah.
Because I went from saying this is happening to me to it's happening for me.
Awesome.
So that I could learn.
It's
But
empowering.
I had to break those repetitive scripts. So I had the scripts in my head, the stories that I tell myself over and over and over. And it wasn't until I kept hearing myself say, I don't know how to do this. I don't want to do this. And sometimes it was the flippant, well, how hard can this be? Right. Don't ask how hard, because you're going to find out. And then I always, like you said earlier, I was not one to ask for help because this was all on me. I had to do this. At least that's the way I felt.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was always this, I'm fine, I've got this. Like, no, thank you. I'm fine. And so I felt like the victim even further, because even though I was telling someone I'm fine, inside I was still hearing that voice of saying, this isn't fair. I have to do this by myself.
I have to do this by myself.
Yes. Keyword, have to.
Have to.
Words, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that polarized thinking, though, I think that's where caregivers find themselves and they experience the stress, the emotional stress. And we're stuck in it sometimes. That is our day to day, because if there's not enough awareness, one day to the next, we stay stuck in that mentality until either something happens to change it or there is an opportunity that someone can seek therapy to work on the past and decide where it came from. That's not always the easy thing. So the bottled emotions that come out of all of this. So one thing that, like, when you had your mother and your grandmother, as we talked about in the previous episode, at some point, did you see your mother as more than just the parent, that the individual that she became as your grandmother's caregiver, not just the parent or provider, in a way that maybe recognizing, like, if there was some, and it may not be something that you experienced, but I had the self-pity kind of thing. So recognizing my mother as an individual as opposed to my parent that had to have, like, I had to care for my parent type of role.
Because that's what you do, right?
Right. The society part of it, that we are obligated to take care of our loved ones. And especially with the healthcare system, the family caregiver is the one, are the ones filling in the gaps overall.
I mean, she started taking care of her when she was 16.
Wow.
So she didn't know any different. And then she tried to have her sister help, and that wasn't working. So then she took over. And here's the thing is, she got a benefit from it.
Absolutely.
She got to be important. She got to know in some way that she was doing it right, because she would take control and advocate, and, and on one hand, she felt like the victim because she had to do it. But there's something we get out of, one, doing it and doing it the way we want to do it. And two, they're getting, I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, but we're getting something out of taking the victim seat. There's a benefit that we're not looking at when we take that victim seat. And it could be absolving ourselves of certain responsibilities, actually, accountability. Well, I can blame it on the system. I can blame this on that. I can put blame elsewhere. And then I'm absolved of certain responsibilities. So a great way to get out of that is to be like, okay, so if my wish was came true, what would that mean for me? You know, if, say, I found a great place that could take care of my mom and I wouldn't need to visit every day or have her in my house or any of these things, suddenly there's a huge loss, actually, of control.
Yes.
Of feeling like I'm needed and I'm important.
Right.
Of the connection. So we have to see, one, that it's serving us in some way. Like, okay, it helps me feel important. It helps fill these things that maybe I could feel another way.
True. Very true. Oh my, yes, that's yet another one I experienced, because transitioning my mother from our house into the memory care community, I did have that period of time of, who am I now? What do I do now? Where is my purpose now that she's there? But the caregiving never really stopped, because I was still doing, yes, she was living elsewhere, but there was the benefit. It wasn't a 24/7 anymore.
Right.
I finally had time for myself. I could think, I could sleep through the night and not have to worry about her getting up and wandering at night, that kind of thing. So there was a benefit, but I didn't feel it in the beginning.
Right. Well, and if we are getting so much benefit, and I use typically people want to be needed and they want to be important.
Right.
Especially to the person that was most important to them as a child. And so even if they go to a home, sometimes they can't let go of that enough to do what you did, which is take time for yourself. Sometimes they'll still like be in it all the time.
Right.
Because they're trying to fill a need to be important. Yeah. And so once we see that's actually a need we're filling by being the caregiver, we can start to do that in other ways, in healthier ways, and not have it all be on one dynamic in our life.
Yes. The interesting part of that, though, is that once mom passed, my routine of what I had, the days that I went to visit her consistently, those days were no longer the same days, the same routine, the same necessity. And so I went back into that once again. Well, now what do I do? Now where's my purpose? Now who am I? Now who needs me?
Yeah.
Especially with my two sons already grown. So it's like, where do I fill that gap? And
you just named something. We're often taking care of our parents at the same time as an empty nest.
Oh, right.
So we might be losing our importance to other people, losing in our mind.
Right. At
the same time.
Yes.
And so we lose ourselves. And so great, we get to focus on our parent or some, it's like, I'll just focus from my kids to my parent, right?
Sure.
But what we need is to be important to ourselves.
Yeah.
But if we were never taught that, if we were taught at a young age that the needs of our mom, I'll just use mom as an example. Like if we have an emotionally unstable parent, we were taught that their needs came first.
Right.
Take care of them so that the household is okay.
Right.
We have to learn to put our needs first. That takes time. It takes work. It takes support. Right. We cannot do that alone.
Oh, gosh.
Because in owning our needs, we have to ask for help. And here's the thing about asking for help, that it's like, if we get a lot of it sense of importance, and a lot of people won't acknowledge it, but if we get really real with ourselves, if we're like the one person in the family taking care of a parent, especially if there's siblings, it feels kind of important.
Yes,
It
did. It felt very important to me, especially because we started out caring together. And then the family drama became a little bit too much. And especially now I recognize each one of us had our own victim mentality from different issues. And trying to work with each other in that same mindset was really challenging.
Yeah.
And so then as we gradually pulled apart and pulled away from what we wanted to do, and I stayed to care for mom and also stepped in to find the control, because that was part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if I'm not in this role and helping, then I feel like I'm out of control. So I want to gain control and take over, and not realizing that by taking over her control of her care,
Mm-hmm.
there was a part of me that was needing control to feel safe in life.
Yeah. In that, we are denying others the opportunity to help.
Yes.
So whether it's grabbing control and even feeling important in that, well, if we gain from it, I imagine other people would gain from it too. Both being important in our life, being important in their life.
Right.
And so when we don't ask for help, we deny others the opportunity to be of service and to be of help in the way that we are doing. And if we get a lot from it, then why would we deny them that?
Right.
And why would we deny, if this person is so important in my life, why would we deny that we're not that important to someone else too? And I'm getting there is a process.
Oh yeah.
But if we look at the people in our life, if we think like, how good does it feel to be of importance? If I get out of the victim mindset and be like, yeah, I do feel kind of important here. I am important here. Mm-hmm. I'm critical.
Oh, right.
Right? That actually feels kind of good. Why would I deny this person that I love, my sister, my brother, or my husband, or my wife? Mm-hmm. That. And we deny them that when we don't ask for help. Yeah. And when we don't see ourselves as equally important as the people that we put up on a pedestal and take care of.
You know, the interesting part of that is by the time I finally acknowledged that I needed help, mm-hmm. and was willing to admit that I needed help and I needed to ask for help, I started recognizing I have the choice to say, I need help. Can you do this? Can you do that? Will I do this? You know, just splitting things up.
Yeah. But
then I also got to the point where it was picking and choosing what they could help with. It kind of, I want things done a certain way, or falling into that same kind of thought, well, if I don't do it, then it won't be done right. Yeah. Which I know a lot of caregivers go through too, and which is what causes a lot of caregivers the grief of transitioning their loved ones into a memory care, because how things are done there as opposed to how they're done in their homes is going to be different.
Very different.
It by nature, I mean, they will make it as close to what they're used to, but it's still going to be different. And that keeps that, no, I can't let go of that. I'm going to keep them with me longer. Mm-hmm. And then that mindset stays longer. I'm choosing to keep them with me longer, but not recognizing I can't let them go because I have to keep them. And it's that loop of saying, I have to keep them.
I have to keep them. I'm choosing this. I have no choice.
Yes. Right. And so it's like, are you really choosing?
Right.
If you're telling yourself, I have to, you've just removed choice out of there.
Yeah. Well, because they had to as a child, because for their parent to be unstable or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, almost always these patterns are set up in childhood. Now, mm-hmm. Granted, sometimes there is just like, this is something I got to take care of because no one else will.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes there is a reality of like, oh, I'm the only child and,
right.
You know, there's no cousins, but if we don't recognize that as children, if that is a dynamic of like having to take care of mom or dad, because if they didn't, to have an unstable caregiver mm-hmm. is death to a child in their nervous system. They have to believe that mom and dad are okay. It's just too scary a world to not believe that mom and dad are okay. And so as children, we step into those roles to keep ourselves safe. It's a survival strategy.
Wow.
So then we repeat that later because we don't know any different. So if we can be like, is this a survival strategy? Am I just repeating this pattern? Are there other options?
Right.
You know, do I have to keep this pattern going of, you know, and we still have it with my family. Like, you know, first it was my mom taking care of her mom, and now we're watching her. And I said, we don't have to navigate mom's emotions all the time. That's not our job. That's hers. So I say that, and I'm still not totally clear of the pattern in my own life.
Right.
I catch myself of like, well, if she's not happy, I can't control her emotions.
No. Yeah. That's
like, yep. And then I'll have to deal with my discomfort over her being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we try and control other outside situations so that we're not uncomfortable.
Right.
And we think it's about them.
No, it's about our discomfort.
We're just controlling the situation to navigate our own discomfort.
Which is where I ended up compartmentalizing everything, and so that I wouldn't have to deal with the discomfort. I would say, this is this, that is that, they are there, this is there, and I'm going to deal with this later, and this, and push it all away.
Yeah. Yeah, we can laugh at it, right? A little bit. It's like, oh, look at,
Because I understand what was happening. But in the moment, it was just chaos. It's just...
Well, and we can say, is one discomfort worse than the other?
Right.
So is the discomfort of this, where I feel like a victim,
right?
I have to do this, I'm stressed out. My other option is to maybe, okay, there's memory care.
Right.
Is the discomfort of the unknown worse than what I'm going through now?
Right.
Maybe not. Can I give it a try? No decision is typically final.
Right.
So maybe that discomfort is worth it. Right? Like,
which is where the homework, I tell caregivers, you got to do your homework.
Yeah.
And look into that. So you can start weighing the pros and cons, and you can make that decision.
Yeah.
And because focusing on that helped me to see, I don't have to do this. I gained something from it, but now I don't have to do this anymore. And I can go either here or here, and this will benefit her this way, and this will benefit her that way.
Yeah.
But either way, I still benefit from either choice. And so then I started seeing a lot more options and not feeling so weighed down, because I could finally say, I don't have to do this.
Right.
I get to do this. I want to do this. I like doing certain things, not everything, because I didn't like doing everything. But it was definitely the switch, the change in mindset to say, I've been looking at it this way, and now I'm going to look at it this way.
Yeah. Well, and what comes up for me around that is looking at our values. So we will live according to our values no matter what. And we may say our values are this,
right?
But they're actually what our actions show.
So true.
Yeah. And so if we're really clear and truthful about where we spend our time, our energy, our money, our thoughts, we will begin to see what our values really are. And when we spend a lot of time on something that isn't aligned to what we really think our values are, because our values were injected by other people, we build up anger and resentment and stress.
Yes.
And so part of what you were saying is looking at what's really important to us and aligning with that. Like when you said, some things I really enjoyed, they probably aligned with your values.
Right.
And the other things didn't. So if we can get really clear on that, we can start to say, okay, it's my values are my values. Like you can change them, but it's a process. And our values will change when parents get sick or whatnot. But can we take away the low priority things that are causing me stress And is it okay? It's okay that they're not a priority to me.
Right.
Can I delegate those things? Can I find someone who that's high on their values?
Oh, right. And
right?
It's a trade-off.
Yeah. And then I'm benefiting them.
Right.
I'm offloading low priority things to someone who loves doing that, who's lit up by that. Like, that's huge. Awesome.
Yeah. Because then both people or everyone involved is benefited.
Yeah.
That's why I love this, which for many years I've lived by the motto of actions speak louder than words.
Yes.
Because I have dealt with several people that they will say one thing, but their actions show something totally different. And it's really hard to reconcile that.
Well, and yeah, can we get really real about that with ourselves?
Right.
You know, because a lot of the victim mentality is that.
Right.
Or that's kind of, we get stuck in, well, but this is important to me. Well, no, it's clearly not. Right. Or this isn't important to me. Well, it must be because you're spending all your time on it. Exactly. So let's just say, yeah, this is clearly important to me. Mm-hmm. Or I'm giving it more importance than I actually want to, and it's causing resentment. What can I do about it?
Right. Well, and that part of it that's causing the resentment and the actions that are growing, there's also this exaggerated victimhood where it's the narcissism, that victim mentality actually goes even further. Instead of it having a positive light to it and you learn how to get out of it, it goes further and it becomes...
becoming the martyr.
Yes. And that is where I see the caregivers reaching burnout way faster.
And here's the part of that this is someone being in service to someone who actually doesn't want it typically, or to a level that the other person doesn't need or want. So sometimes we'll actually take on way more service than is necessary when the other person maybe doesn't even want it.
Right.
Now, sometimes if someone has Alzheimer's or whatnot and it's advanced, they can't really ask for the care they want. Right. But that is, and this is going into shadow aspects of some of the stuff I've learned with Wheel of Consent, where we're overgiving in a dynamic where it's not actually needed or wanted often, and that creates a martyr syndrome. It's like, oh, woe is me.
So is this someone who is actually not necessarily lacking a purpose because they are overly involved, but taking their purpose to an extreme?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also they are getting a benefit from playing that role. So the martyr is like, oh, none of this works for me. None of this works for me. This is horrible, right? I call BS.
Right.
If we get really real about it, they are getting a lot out of that role. The victim role. So the drama, did we speak about the drama triangle?
Not yet.
Okay. So there's the victim, the rescuer, and the perpetrator. Once you step into the victim role, there has to be a perpetrator and there has to be a rescuer. And you will find those people in your life and create a triangle. And so when we blame other people, make them the perpetrator, we bring them into that triangle. And then helpers want to come in and rescue. So a lot of caregivers actually tend to be a rescuer.
Interesting.
But then they become the victim because we just keep trading roles. And it's like we keep ourselves in this survival mechanism, survival dynamic, and we'll loop people in to keep the dynamic going. And it's just like, it's human behavior. It's just until we're aware, oh, I'm in this drama triangle. How the hell did that happen? We don't know how to get out, or we don't even realize what's going on. And so, caregivers aside, I'll tell people, if someone is blaming you and making you the perpetrator, don't engage. Don't defend because they're just going to keep, if they're in the victim mindset, they're going to keep doing that.
That's so true.
And also, when we become the rescuer, we put that person in the victim role. Oh, they're not capable.
Oh, right.
Now, granted, sometimes they're not capable, but sometimes in our efforts to be the good person, we may deny our parents or whoever, or children, whoever we're taking care of, the opportunity to keep growing in whatever capacity they can by taking care of everything.
Right.
Because we want to be the rescuer so bad, but we actually hold them down in that victim role when we do that. Instead of, hey, I want to take care of you. What's the best way to do that as a more equal way?
Right.
Yeah. And then we blame circumstance as the perpetrator. We blame the healthcare system. We blame our husband for not being supportive, or our siblings for not being as great as we are. And then everyone gets looped in. And it just creates drama and stress.
The storm that goes. And see, this is why I wanted to have this conversation, is because we know that stress for caregiving is just part of the role.
Yeah.
There is the physical stress and the mental stress, but this emotional stress these are the areas that we can actually change. It may not be the quicker change, but it's the part that can keep the burnout from actually happening. Because if we can be more aware of what's happening and why it's happening and where these feelings are coming from. Because I went from, I've got to do this, I have to do this, and I have to do this in this time frame, because if I don't do this now, then all these other things are going to happen, and then I'm not going to have enough time. And then I was short-tempered with keeping my mother to a strict bedtime because I wanted my time to wind down. And it was just things that I didn't realize where they were coming from were stressing me.
Right.
And then someone asked me, are you stressed? I'm like, well, no, I'm not stressed. I'm fine. But then I was doing all the things that clearly showed I was stressed. I can't sleep. I'm having a hard time. I'm stress eating. I'm gaining weight. Which also stress too.
Well, those are coping mechanisms.
Right.
They're, for lack of a better word, maladaptive coping mechanisms.
Yes.
Until we have better ones. And I love that you brought in emotions, because I had a thought earlier around emotions. So if we're more aware of our emotions, say we're looking at putting our parent in memory care. Right. We will be more aware of, oh, I imagine I'm going to have a lot of grief. I'm going to have because if we're more aware now, we can set ourselves up for success in those transitions, knowing oh, I'm probably, when my kid left, I was sad, and right. And then we can set ourselves up for self-care, which I don't like self-care because it sounds like we're responsible for all of it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
For care.
Yes.
Hey, sister, partner, whatever, I anticipate this is going to be a rough time for me. Can I reach out to you? Whatever, setting ourselves up for that, knowing our emotions. Did I share a simple tool last time for getting in touch on the spot with what's going on? No. Okay. So I learned it from Jason Gaddis, one of my mentors. So I'm just going to use his acronym. It's Nestor. Nestr. So instead of just just slow down, just breathe, just meditate. I mean, those are great.
Right.
But it doesn't actually tap you into what's going on. So Nestor, N is number. So on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being I'm bolting out of the room. How activated am I?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anything above a 5, I'm really not available for connection. I'm not able to have a really great conversation. I'm not able to manage conflict without shutting down or defending. So if we can start to see, okay, how, if I know what 10 feels like,
right.
And 0's zen.
So chill.
Sunday morning with my coffee in the sun and in a bath or whatever. Knowing that, where am I at right now?
Right.
E is, what emotion am I having? So we identify the number. What emotion am I having? Sadness, anger, resentment, whatever. Some people may need an emotion wheel because they're not used to that. Mm-hmm. Sensation. What sensations am I feeling in my body? And, the more activated we are, the harder it is.
Yeah.
But if we slow down and feel, we can be like, okay, I got tingling in my hands. This hand. I've got warmth, right? It's awesome and it's hot, right? I feel hot in my chest, or tension in my chest, or tension in my neck. What thoughts are running through my head? So we detach enough to be like, what are those thoughts? And then and then R is resource. Where do I feel resource in my body? So it could be my breath, or my butt on the seat,
right,
or my back against the chair. So where can I find resource in my body? And it's just like this really quick check-in. It could be 30 seconds. Some people may want to take up to 2 minutes. But it starts to help us identify on the spot, I'm triggered.
Yeah.
I have this emotion. If I can be with the sensation of the emotion, I can start to see these thoughts are actually creating it.
I like that.
But instead of doing that from an analytical way like I just did, let's just sit and go, Nestor, and then resource in the body, because everything we're doing, these coping mechanisms, is to get out of the body. Because the sensation that comes up with these thoughts and these stories is it's uncomfortable.
Right.
Everything we're doing is to try and avoid the discomfort of emotions that are coming up from our body, either from trauma or reactivated trauma, or from the stories that we create around things.
Right.
So when we learn to pause, feel, be with the emotion, 45 seconds, it'll shift.
Right. Which is incredible because it does.
If we just sit with it.
Yes.
Yeah. But this is a beautiful, simple exercise. Number, emotion, sensation, thought, resource in the body. To start to develop the awareness and pausing. But our brain will just start to make the connections. We don't have to analyze it.
We just know it. Maybe not at first. I know I had to practice that. So eventually something would come up, and instead of having that immediate, I'm on 8 or 9 or 10 on the scale where I need to bolt and go.
Yeah.
It was like, wait a minute. What's happening?
Yep.
What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Why is this happening? Why am I feeling this? And I would get a flash of something from childhood.
Yes.
And immediately connect and say, oh, that person just made me feel this in this moment because it reminds me of this other situation.
Yeah.
And then breathe in, let it go. That person is not the situation.
Yeah. The past is not in the present, but in our brain it is.
Exactly.
In our body it is, until we slow down, like you said.
Right. Because even when I found that moment of saying, okay, I'm not the victim here. I choose to be here. I want to be here. I get to be here. Even when I made it to that point, I still had those moments where I would come across someone, interact with someone that made me feel like that victim. And it would immediately pull me back. And then, wait a minute, what just happened? I was okay a minute ago. I was fine. And now I've got all this anxiety and I feel like my stomach is just bottomed out, and this rush of energy and this back of my throat feels like the gag reflex is. Yeah. It's really hard to identify that though, and understand that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And it's telling you something.
Yeah.
The body's telling us something.
Exactly.
If we just slow down and listen. It's beautiful. You just actually went through I'm triggered, number. I'm feeling an emotion. These are the sensations happening in my body.
Yes.
It's that's the natural order. And you mentioned going from 0 to 10, right? When we don't understand that we're being triggered, we will go from 0 to 10 because we're in reaction.
Right.
This process allows us to learn to feel the beginning of the trigger before we're already like out the gate. Because it actually starts sooner, but we're just totally tuned out to our body typically. And so this simple practice is something where we can start to learn our body, start to feel some of those things coming up earlier. So we're less reactive. We're less likely to go to 10 because we pause earlier. It's like, whoa, I know that feeling, right? And I know that clenching. Yes. I'm not breathing right now. What's going on? Like, why was I holding my breath? You know,
right.
These, and then having insights like you were talking about happen naturally, where you can say, oh, this isn't even what's going on. Right. This is my past showing up in the present because of something that my brain saw as similar.
And that, yeah, definitely.
So now I have choice.
Yes.
Because I see that that's not now. And now all of a sudden I have choice.
Right. The choice that I momentarily could not see.
Totally.
Because I was too busy reacting. And now I stop and slow. Not as much reaction, but enough to be aware. So in that awareness, there are some choices. I can, and they're not polarized. It's not that this or that. It's, well, I can this, or maybe that, or possibly this, or I can combine these things. And all of a sudden there's a lot more choice because I'm thinking more clearly.
Yeah, because you're present.
Yes. And that's the key, being in the present moment.
Yeah. And it doesn't require you to do, like, yes, I've done 10-day Vipassana retreats and, you know, meditated 2 hours a day.
Right.
When I got out. And yes, the insights are amazing when you have that in your life, but you don't need that to start to develop the awareness and presence that you're talking about.
Right.
Like the thing I mentioned, which you actually did when you were describing it, you did that whole progression.
Right.
Is really what's necessary to get started on that road. And it's, you know, some people set a reminder on their phone every 2 hours or something to just check in.
Right.
You know, oh, let's do the nester, or
that's a good practice.
You know, just because
it almost sounds like a dance, do the nester.
Right.
Well, because one of the things, it became a mantra for me that I would have to, if I felt that sensation before I recognized, wait, something's happening, and it would not necessarily be in the order, I would just feel that sensation. It's like, oh, okay. So then I would drop into my mantra, whatever it was, believe, breathe, be still. Believe, breathe, be still. And I would have this continual mantra, or found a safe word, or words in my case, because for a long time in that victim mentality, it was, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And so I would find that safe word and reverse it and say, I am good enough. I am good enough. I am good enough.
Nice. Yeah. And so you slowed down enough to even hear to know what thoughts are going through our head. Because sometimes we're not even aware that this is
right.
That we're having those thoughts. They're just so programmed.
Well, and unfortunately for caregivers, our routines, sometimes we feel like we don't have a choice, even though there is a choice. But when you're rushing your loved one, getting them up in the morning, trying to get them in with breakfast and get them changed because you've got a doctor's appointment in the next 45 minutes and you've got to drive across town, you don't know how traffic's going to be, and you get there and then there's this long line and there's waiting, and it just, that flow is, how do you stop and sit in that process? But you can do that in a 45-second. I mean, even at a red light on the way to the doctor's office.
Yeah, you can do it while you're driving. You don't have to close your eyes even.
Right.
You know, like,
which I do more now too.
Yeah, I do a lot. I drive a lot. So yeah, there's a lot you can do while you're driving. It's amazing. Rather than just, you know, be mad or tune out.
Right.
But yeah, it's a simple exercise that pays really big dividends.
Yes, it does. And being able to, like you said, do the breathing exercise, some of that stuff, yes, it is so beneficial. And I will go to that in a heart. As soon as I feel that warmth going up my neck, get into that breathing exercise to pull it all the way back down to my core.
Nice.
But it's something that has taken me time to practice.
Yeah.
And I didn't start practicing it until I was aware that there was the need for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awareness.
Yeah.
And one thing that came up for me too is sometimes we benefit from the chaos. The chaos in our life. I'm looking at my own life right now and questioning myself. I'm like, it keeps us from feeling things. If we're always busy, we never have to feel.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And so looking at that aspect, I think is critical too. And I had something, but I'll come back to it.
And that's what caregivers, I mean, sometimes it is the routine. It evolves. And other times it is the routine they create because the doing is another thing. I hear them caregivers when they're saying, I have to. It's also, well, I have to take Betty Sue to practice, and I have to take Bobby Joe to, band practice. And then I have to go do this for my parent. And then I have to go and...
Here's the thing. And let's just reframe I have to.
Yeah.
So anyone who's saying I have to, I choose to make this a priority in my life.
Yes.
I have chosen this as a priority in my life.
Yes.
Like that right there.
That reframes it.
Totally.
Right away.
And then they can be like,
why did
I actually don't want to
why did I choose this again?
I really did choose this. And why did I choose this? Or they can, they can have some more ownership, get out of the survival mode a little bit and be like, oh, I am a person of agency. I actually did choose to make this a priority in my life. Now what?
Yeah.
The other thing when I was thinking about chaos, sometimes in our childhood, if our childhood was chaotic, that's our normal. Our nervous system doesn't know. So
that's true.
Quiet and stillness feels scary.
Yes, that's true.
So if that sounds like it resonates, it can be amazing to create an experience for ourselves where our body can feel safe to slow down. And that could be making sure we get massage, making time for a hot tub, maybe a retreat, something where we get a sense of what is it like to let go, to have full breath. Because once we've felt that in our lives, it's more obvious when we don't have it. Like I only knew in my last job, I was holding my breath because I had created opportunities in my life to where my body felt expansive and free and open and
yes.
But if I never created that experience for myself, I didn't know the disparity.
Right.
So that's something that I would, if someone can create that for themselves somehow.
Right.
Especially if they're like, yeah, it's really scary to slow down. Well, then find a safe place and safe way to do it because your body needs that and it will help you, guide you in knowing this is not a good situation right now.
Right.
My body's telling me. Right? So
listen to the body.
Yeah.
It will help. It'll make a world of difference. And the connection of the mind, body, and soul, there's a reason for that connection.
Yeah, because ultimately we're vibrational beings.
Right.
And I mean that literally in Vipassana meditation, we sit with sensation. And then we resist, we look, any sensation, we judge it as good or bad, kind of like I was saying earlier, last session. And then when we resist it based on our judgment of it, we create more pain in the body. So it's like, oh, that hurts. And we create more pain. And it became so evident to me that my resistance of reality, the current reality, was actually causing me so much pain. And when I accepted it and I sat into it, that pain became pleasurable. It just became a sensation.
Wow. That's interesting.
And so when I say we're vibrational, it's the vibration of the body that we are responding to. But typically we don't slow down enough in real life like we do in a 10-day Vipassana retreat.
Oh, right.
To notice, oh, literally there's a vibrational sensation that is causing me to react. Like if we just do this all of a sudden, we don't even understand that was something that started 5 seconds ago. And our emotions do the same thing in our body and we react the same way. So I state that more for context, unless someone wants to do a Vipassana retreat, but I felt it and experienced it at a very deep level, that is true.
It is very true.
Buddha knew what he was doing.
Yes, I agree.
In that context.
Because our emotions are a vibration. Mm-hmm. And if we stay in that low emotion, or the anger and the fear and the sadness, if we stay in those states, we keep our vibration low. Yeah. So it's really hard to get to the higher vibration of happiness and joy and peacefulness. Yeah. If we don't become aware of where we're currently at and understand that we don't have to always be in this state. There is a higher vibration, a higher state of mind to be in. Yeah.
And all it does is require us to look and accept both sides of the situation.
Yes.
That in reality, there are equal benefits and drawbacks to everything happening to us. And if we can look at that more, if we're complaining, look at what's positive. If we're idealizing something, look at the drawbacks.
Right.
We don't want to do that.
Right.
But when we do, we come into center, and then we're just more clear, we're more inspired, we're able to, creatively problem solve, we're able to connect more deeply with people and ourselves. Pretty amazing.
Yes, exactly.
That's so good. And it's not constant. That's part of life.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing this again, because every time, when I thought caregiving was the journey ends and that part of my life was over and I'm going to start a new chapter, it's not exactly over. I still interact with caregivers, and it makes me feel good that I gained the benefit from what I've learned from my mother so that I can turn around and help other caregivers. Yeah. But this information that you shared is so incredibly vital for caregivers to know and understand, because it gives them choice. It gives them understanding, and it gives that starting point of making a difference in their caregiving lives. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So for the caregivers who want any more information and want to follow on how to do this a little bit more, how do they find you?
So I'm Amy RX Baker everywhere. Okay. But the best way, because I can update my links and everything, is Linktree. Okay. So Linktree, Amy RX Baker. Okay. Yeah, that's the easiest way, and I actually have an 8-week group coaching course program that called the Pleasure Path. So it helps people get out of their own way.
Good.
And create more joy in their life. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm really excited about it.
I think I'm going to be having to take the class. Oh, I appreciate every bit of it. So I hope this episode gave you a lot more food for thought, because as caregivers, we've got to fill our toolbox with every bit that we can. And if you want any more information about this or have any questions, you can also go to proactivecaregiver.com. And if you have any other questions and topic interests, you can send that to info@proactivecaregiver.com as well. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be proactive. Take care. Thank you for joining today. To find out more about becoming a proactive caregiver yourself, visit proactivecaregiver.com and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Music provided by www.joystock.org. The Proactive Caregiver is produced by Canon Light Media.